Monsters and mannequins. The uncanny in horror film. The Thing and I Feel Fantastic. Horror films have been filling us with fear for decades, and despite a plethora of theories, we can never quite seem to come to a consensus on just why it is we love to be scared. But the emotions that these films play into have long existed before film was a mainstream form of entertainment, and far before the motion picture was ever even invented in the 19th century. There's one specific feeling, though, that some of our most influential scholars have been engaging with for many years, a very particular kind of terror, something horrible, something indescribable, something that eventually became known as the uncanny. Closer examination of what we call the uncanny entered into scholarly conversation at the open of the 20th century when German psychiatrist Ernst Jentsch published a paper titled On the Psychology of the Uncanny. He began to touch on a feeling of strangeness and discomfort that resulted due to a kind of perceptual disorientation. He called this the German Unheimlich, which translates to the unfamiliar, or to something that doesn't belong in the home. A decade later, Sigmund Freud would respond to this scholarship, elaborating on Jentsch's ideas. He described the uncanny as something that, quote, undoubtedly belongs to all that is terrible, to all that arouses dread and creeping horror, unquote. He emphasized the importance of the etymology of uncanny. Why is it that familiarity is so tied into the feeling? To explain it, he eventually dives into typical Freudian psychoanalytical sludge that involves castration complexes, which is a whole other video, but his fascinations are nonetheless intriguing. What both researchers make clear is that the uncanny is something more than fear. It's one step beyond that, a place that goes into a realm of more than just fear but also dread and disgust, often of something impossible to know. Is it the fear of the unknown, though, or the fear of something we don't want to know? As the film industry has grown, it just so happens that we've discovered that the worlds of the silver screen are particularly suited to evoke the uncanny. Although Freud didn't mention cinema, he made an important distinction in the experience of the uncanny. In real life, it's a physical sensation of imminent danger and inexplicability. But in entertainment, all that a storyteller has to do is pretend to create a world of what he called common reality, and then aim to dismantle it. Australian scholar Leslie Stern agrees, saying that, quote, cinema taps our imagination, our unconscious, to produce a sensory effect of dissonance at the very moment of identity, unquote. In saying this, Stern emphasizes that the act of watching film is inherently an uncertain one, asking us to believe in realities that aren't real and to accept distortions to our understanding of time and place. In this way, we never know what to expect, and our sense of reality is always in question. This, combined with the wider society that has a hunger to scare itself, makes films the perfect greeting gown for the uncanny to reveal itself in full force. One movie that confronts the uncanny head first is John Carpenter's The Thing. Upon release, it was widely regarded as a heap of gore-filled garbage. Critics and audiences in 1982 seemed to hate it, and Carpenter was actually fired from his next directing role because of the disaster. Some, including scholar Barbara Creed, argue that his career never recovered as a result. Perhaps this was because the 80s was a strange time in Hollywood, where studios and audiences were used to hunky, chiseled masculatrons who were saviors of the world, and not to the crippled, frozen, and probably soon dead victims at the conclusion of the events of The Thing. Perhaps this bad reception was in fact due to something else, though. Something that audiences didn't want to confront. Something uncanny. Physical movement, both widely and in this film, are inherently wrapped up in the feeling of the uncanny. In stillness, there is no danger, no urgency. Things can look unnatural, but perception becomes more stimulated when the sense of sight is brought to another level. Although referencing a fight scene in the film Blade Runner, Leslie Stern posits that biotransformation, in a human regard, evokes a sense of the uncanny when it's lightning fast. She says that our emotions lag behind our sensual experience but linger far after it's over. She describes the feeling of the floor falling from under you, the instantaneous lurch that hypothetically would emerge from within your body. The Thing, though, sophisticates this feeling. Although the actions on screen are fast-paced, its transformations are slow. As flesh mutates and reforms upon layers of itself, our emotions aren't left behind. They're made to gather and ooze into a thick pool of dread. The feeling isn't a lurch, it's a low rumble, an emotional nausea that begins to make you question what might be inside of you. It's not just scary, it's a different feeling. It's Well, alien. Important to the theory of the uncanny is our ability as human beings to empathize. In fact, some scholars consider the idea that the uncanny is the opposite of empathy, that it's not just fear and dread we're dealing with, but disgust. Beyond the obvious disgust its gorefest may provide a viewer, the thing and its filmmaking reaches beyond the monster to challenge our ability to empathize and inspire paranoia. The characters themselves feel as hollow as they fear each other to be. Their eyes are often covered by sunglasses or masks, their bodies wrapped up in thick jackets and snowsuits. Many of their names are barely names at all: Knowles, Windows, Childs. Since we have no better idea than the crew who is a thing and who is not, our sense of human empathy is warped into something much less understandable. It's not people we're being asked to empathize with, but rather things shaped like people. The exclamation point to the thing's uncanny nature is none other than its infamous gore. As people are mutilated into biological mush, bones snap and flesh stretches and tears and reforms, it's not that the gore looks real. It's our reaction to it that feels real. Our disgust feels real. In the act of watching the film, we've chosen to suspend our disbelief in a reality that is positioned to be identical to our own. And although we know it's not real, it sure doesn't feel fake. The thing in question isn't just a monstrosity of practical effects. It's something frighteningly human, yet not human at all. It is an exercise of the almost, something in between. It's something that lies in what some may call a valley, an uncanny valley. In 1970, a roboticist by the name of Masahiro Mori published an essay where he coined the term uncanny valley. In his study, he experimented with robotic objects to conclude that a particularly uncanny experience is provoked when a robot looks like a human but fails to achieve a lifelike appearance. Essentially, something needs to try very hard to be human but fail to be truly uncanny. According to Freud, one crucial phenomenon that produces the feeling of the uncanny is, quote, when one doubts whether an apparently animate being is really alive or whether a lifeless object might be in fact animate, unquote. While The Thing engages with the former idea, another infamous film, although a YouTube short rather than a studio-produced feature, embodies the latter part of Freud's idea in a fascinating way. A mysterious YouTube video published in 2009 reignited this term colloquially, a singular video uploaded by a YouTube channel with almost no subscribers at the time. And although details have been unearthed about the video, revealing that there's no true sinister reality hiding underneath it, it nonetheless struck horror in its viewers and was the site of many conspiracy theories, eventually reaching creepypasta status. To understand its effect, though, one must see it for themselves. Creepy, right? Well, you may have just experienced the feeling of the uncanny. If you describe this video in an objective sense, the emotion you felt while watching it may feel silly to admit. You'd say something like, it's a video of a mannequin singing and dancing to a monotonous song in what looks like to be a regular room in a regular home. But there's a lot more to this video than that. It's the way the mannequin is moving, not quite human, but still maneuvering human-shaped limbs. The voice of the mannequin, spitting out intelligible words but sounding robotic and stiff. It's a perfect storm of almost human elements that whip up a cocktail of dread and disgust, despite its harmless objective reality. In his essay many years ago, and an engagement with it since publishing, Mori and other scholars emphasize different dimensions of perception as important to creating the feeling of the uncanny. Mori was interested in quantitative analysis, the scientist that he was, but here we have a case study. Maybe it isn't simply the mannequin's human likeness or unlikeness that scares us. Maybe it's the artificial lighting that's just as fake as the mannequin itself. Maybe it's the lack of facial expression, the unnatural poses, the room, barren of personality, so much so that it looks uninhabitable. Who lives here? What lives here? The strangeness of the situation forces us to ask questions we don't want to find the answers to, and there's nothing more uncanny than that. And there's no better evidence to prove why film is such a good medium to produce this emotion. So what exactly is the uncanny? It's an emotional cocktail of fear, dread, and disgust. It's when we're confronted with something as unknowable as it is terrifying. It is, as Freud says, all things terrible. The more important and in true uncanny fashion perhaps unanswerable question is, what makes us feel this way? Is it a protective evolutionary trait lingering in us long after we've overcome some mysterious historical threat? Or is it something more personal, something horrifying that lies repressed inside all of us? Whatever it is, these films, using both mannequins and monsters, take advantage of it. They trigger it, employ it, feed on it. They make us feel like something is seriously wrong with what we're seeing. Perhaps the truest answer is that the uncanny is produced out of a fear that something is seriously wrong with us, with human beings. Something hidden somewhere so deep we may never access it but in brief, horrifying glimpses. After all, why else would we be so obsessed with scaring ourselves? Thanks for watching, and for an alphabetized, organized bibliography of works cited, please see the supplemental document uploaded to Blackboard, which also contains the script for this video essay.